Change is coming for the mobile industry and things will never be the same again. 5G is on the horizon, along with key enabling technologies such as NFV, SDN and edge computing. Even the LTE World Summit is changing its name to 5G World. So is it the end of the line for LTE?
LTE is a phenomenal success around the world. There are now more than 400 commercially launched networks, and we predict that by the end of the year there'll be 460. More than 30% of LTE operators are investing in LTE Advanced, initially carrier aggregation. There's now more than 1,000 LTE Advanced terminals on the market.
There's a lot of life left in the development of LTE because we're now moving into release 13 and being developed. We're going to see LTE Advanced now progress further, and there's multiple devices now, over 3,000 devices. And we're going to see LTE Advanced start to bring in new services that will support things like the Internet of Things, for instance.
I think we're about 1/3 of the way through where the current version of 4G can get to. I'd still like it to see it go faster, we all would, but I think I'm reasonably happy of how fast it's going compared to previous generations.
The Internet of Things is an obvious growth market for LTE, especially as operators need to drastically increase their current share of IoT connections from alternative low-power wireless technologies.
There's a lot of potential for LTE. There's a huge explosion in terms of the amount of devices coming on the network. I'm hearing figures of 50 billion devices on the network by 2020, which is a huge explosion of devices. And the problem for service providers is that they need to find ways to help manage the traffic and this growth of information coming onto their network and through their network to be able to handle it appropriately. So we're talking about how to downscale LTE to provide the proper support for these types of devices.
There's no reason why LTE, which delivers a quality of service that is controllable, cannot operate in those unlicensed bands and provide a very efficient and controlled access for those smaller, like sensor-type platform Internet of Things devices.
You have a sequence of about 26 steps for a device to register appropriately on the mobile network. And then it's going to send its little bit of data, and then there's another 18 steps for it to deregister from the network. It's going to go to sleep, it's going to wait 5 minutes, 15 minutes, an hour, whatever time frame, and it's going to do it again. And the problem here is that they're going to do it on regular intervals. So all the devices are going to wake up at the same time, all connect at the same time, send a little bit of data, and then disconnect. So you have these big surges and waves of connections occurring that these service providers aren't designed to handle, because when you use your smartphones, you don't have that cadence and that rhythm of how these devices are going to connect, and it's going to be a big challenge on how you scale for that.
Voice over LTE, VoLTE, is another potential growth area, yet it's been a long time coming. Is it now too little, too late?
The industry was perhaps expecting the start of this year to see a ramp up in VoLTE. That seems now to have been deferred somewhat, and there's still some question marks about what the business case is. I think the initial business case of cost saving is still valid. At the same time, voice over Wi-Fi seems to have accelerated and become more important to the operators. There's a more immediate return on investment.
The key thing is that we need to, first of all, offer excellent quality of service and customer experience, whether that's for voice or for data. And at the same time, we need to make sure that we can interwork properly and make it seamless for the customer.
Now we can see that we can reduce the call time to below 1 second at least, the call setup. Compared to a traditional call in 3G, the latency could be like 6 seconds or 7 seconds. So it's really, really fast.
So I'm very confident that it's coming very soon. We will be launching commercially this year. It's a big part of our rollout in the rural areas as well, because we can extend our coverage using the 800 MHz spectrum with VoLTE.
Meanwhile, LTE is threatening to push into unlicensed spectrum bands with LTE-U, currently the preserve of Wi-Fi.
I think it's got a little bit hyped. LTE-U itself, I think it can give benefit to certain operators, especially in indoor situations, and so I'm not necessarily against it. We don't see it as a big objective or priority in the short term for ourselves, and we're concentrating more on areas of LTE where we can improve the quality of service management, where LTE-U, because it's unlicensed, per se will always be a little bit more vulnerable to not being able to manage the quality of service as you'd expect.
As operators look at new LTE service models and use cases, they also need to re-architect their networks to support this business transformation.
But now we want to start talking about things like virtualization, NFV and SDN, to be able to provide that flexible and scalable network to meet those demands and those changing demands as things evolve.
Mobile operators have long been buying their network by essentially buying large boxes. They're purpose-built. And these boxes have both the hardware as well as the software necessary to implement a variety of network functions. It's quite costly when you buy hardware in a purpose-built box. So with network function virtualization, what we're doing is breaking the connection between the hardware and the software, and basically making it so the software becomes a separate purchase and the hardware can become more of a commodity item.
So when we talk about NFV, Network Functions Virtualization, and SDN, what we're really doing is we're taking the concepts that were applied and have been applied for many years in the enterprise environment, which is cloud computing, virtualization, hyper-virtualization, and bringing it to the service provider core network.
By using these network virtualization functions, we can split the user plane and the control plane. So the control plane could be like in a centralized way, keeping track of all the base stations. Where are they? They can track how the users are moving, but then we put the user plane very close to the base stations and the users. So as long as, when the user is moving, the control plane can then track it and switch to another forwarding unit for a user plane. That will then reduce the latencies and it will be a more efficient operation of the networks.
The cost benefits, the increased agility at getting new services into the network and scaling them up, importantly, it is hugely important. So we worked with VIP Mobile in Serbia, part of the Telekom Austria group, earlier this year on a virtualized VoLTE proof of concept. And that shows that there's real world activity and actually taking these things out into live environments and understanding them.
SDN and NFV on the core side I think is coming soon, but not right now when we're actively trying and looking at it. But I think the area where it could go faster is on the edge of the network, where you can actually trial and experiment faster because you can do limited trials and actually fail sometimes and fail quickly, but get the knowledge, get the experience, feed that back in. That's why I think that ecosystem could, at least in the big operators in Europe where we still have to deal with a lot of legacy issues, could actually go faster than on the core side in some cases.
NFV and SDN mean that operators will need to re-evaluate their skills base, which is becoming a critical issue.
It is a real issue, and is a very real issue because the traditional service provider model in terms of how these experts and these engineers and I work, we're network engineers. We look at it mostly at a network layer. And when we start talking about virtualization, as you say, software, we need to move away from being network engineers to what I like to say, application network engineers.
I think there's definitely a way for the industry to gather the skills that they need. It's not a matter of changing the people out, it's just a matter of giving them some additional training, some additional understanding. The function is still the same. A switch switches calls, but it's just now a software switch. So they need to learn some new skills about how to administer, how to run such a switch.
The evolution of LTE will overlap with the emergence of 5G networks in 2020, but this transition will enable operators to introduce 5G type services ahead of commercial launch.
5G has certain attributes like low latency, higher bandwidth, massive MIMO, and also massive connections, again needed for the Internet of Things, for instance. But there'll be certain features like better latency, and then also carrier aggregation with higher bandwidth, that will help bring some of those features into LTE Advanced and whatever the next version of LTE will be from Release 13, which is the name is being defined by 3GPP now. So that will start to take us into the realms of 5G and give us some early examples and experience of what 5G will really look like. And then when 5G is finally arrived and it's been decided what that really is, we'll start to get a far richer experience and use cases.
We are also looking a lot into something we call pre-5G. That is, let the 4G legacy users get 5G experience a little bit before the real 5G will come. And there we have done some products. This one is a massive MIMO system. We have demonstrated it live. So that's a TDD-based system. So it can improve the capacity like 6 times compared to a traditional TD LTE system. So it's 128 antennas. And we can have it in 3D. So one use case is that you want to cover a tall building. You mount the antenna on the other side, and then you can steer the beams, like a few beams to one floor, another beams to another floor, and so on.
There are many aspects of 5G that we can bring forward on 4G. So we will look at every one of those, and where it's right for our customers, we will bring it forward on top of the 4G. There's no reason why we should wait. If it's something that we can put into our customers' hands and it benefits them, in the 2 or 3 years that are coming, why not?
So Informa are going to be evolving the LTE World Summit next year to become 5G World, which is in line with the market's movement towards 5G over the next 5 years. So we've been successfully working with the industry over the past 10 years, and Informa have now realised that we need to evolve to help the industry get to 5G. So for the next few years we're going to be working with them, covering the LTE topics, LTE Advanced, but also all the technologies that come between LTE and 5G. And we look forward to doing that in London next year.
We need to make sure that whatever we do in the next 5 years over our 4G network leads the development for the next 20 years in the UK to make sure we stay up there. That's why we're interested in being engaged right now.
This is Guy Daniels for TelecomTV at the last ever LTE World Summit in Amsterdam.